from the Penn Libraries.
Family Medicine, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. So I think you might have noticed in the top right of your screen that we have the recording is on. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to all of you. So as we saw a little bit earlier in the introductions, people have many different things they are trying to do with NVivo. Shimrit, would you please tell us a little bit about the way in which you've thought through the topics that you're going to be presenting to us? And if you would like to share your screen, that would be great.
Sure. Can everybody see my screen? Great. Okay, so some of the things I want to talk about today are the more advanced query functions in NVivo, and those can be really helpful both in helping folks start to think about their analysis and what's coming up in their data, and as a way to even just explore their data in the beginning of a project, but also in doing it later on once they have a completely built database and trying to really hone in their analysis. So I was planning on showing you three types of queries. And here I have NVivo open in the Query tab. So you can see there are a few different query options. This morning I was going to show you first a word frequency query, then a text search query, and then a matrix coding query. Some of these, the first two tools I mentioned, the word frequency query and the text search query, both can be done with data before it's even coded. So maybe you have a data set and you really want to do a more of a grounded theory approach where you're just looking at what's in the data, what's coming up, and then you're going to use that to maybe create your coding structure. So you could use those types of things to explore the data before you started. The matrix coding query is a little bit more of an advanced tool, and it's something that you would use once your database is completely assembled. So you have your interviews or your focus groups or whatever other data you're planning on using. And in addition, maybe you've also collected some other attribute data. For example, demographics about your participants, or you've collected survey scales about your participants. You can then incorporate that into the data set and run all sorts of queries and ask questions of how do people sort out based on their demographics. So those are the three different types of queries I was planning on presenting.
Thank you. It's actually helpful to be able to see your screen, full screen. So what I will do is intermittently make the screen take over, but then also shrink it so that I'm able to take a peek at the chat. Let me ask a quick question of everybody before we jump into it. If you could just raise your hand using the icon at the top if you have used NVivo before. If you've never used NVivo before, this will give us a sense that it might be better for Shimrit to first give a little bit of an overview. So it looks like about half of us have used NVivo before and half of us have never used NVivo. So Shimrit, that might be helpful for you in terms of giving a tour of the interface. Let me go ahead and clear statuses. Let's see. Yep, perfect. Great. Okay. So part of what we might want to mention is that when you open NVivo is now available on every PC laptop in all the libraries. It's also now available on a Mac, and there is a 30-day trial version. There's a link to that on the workshop description. When you open NVivo, it comes with this particular data set that Shimrit's going to guide us through, which is this sample project that has an environmental focus to it. So Shimrit, I'm going to turn it back over to you to walk us through our first query. And I'm going to ask our audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window, and we'll come back to them in a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Anu. So just to tell you a little bit about the interface, since some folks aren't familiar, NVivo, I like to say that it's very Microsoft-y looking, so similar to if folks are familiar with Microsoft Outlook. In Outlook, most of the time you're in this navigation pane on the left-hand side where you usually toggle between mail and calendar. So in NVivo, most of the time, when you're working in it, when you're bringing data in and coding it, you would be toggling between sources and nodes. So sources is where you put all your data, and nodes is where you put your coding structure, your organizational structure that you would use to sort and tag pieces of data. So there's this navigation pane along the left-hand side, and you can see that as I switch the tools, different options pop up. And today I'm going to run some queries. There's also this tab, these tabs along the top, the ribbon, so also similar to most Microsoft Office programs. And for the queries, you can control what queries you run from the Query tab. So I'm going to start up by running a word frequency query. And to do that, I can click on the word frequency button here in the Query tab, or go to the queries on the left-hand side and right-click in the white space and say New Query Word Frequency. Either way, it should take you to this dialog box. Now, when you run a query in NVivo, you have the option to actually save that query if you want. So in essence, you're saving the question that you're asking of your data. And you do that by clicking the Add to Project button. So when I click this, I can actually name my query, and then also save it and run it later if I want. I'm not going to do that right now. I just wanted to show you that option. So in the word frequency query, I have a few different options. Right now for finding matches, I'm going to ask it to leave it as an exact. And what the word frequency query is doing is it's going to look through either your entire data set if you want, or any subset of that data set. So say you did focus groups and interviews, and you just want to look at the interviews, you can tell NVivo just to look at the interview text. So I'm going to tell it to search under text. You can also search annotations, and those would be notes that you attach to your data, or text and annotations. I'm going to leave it at text. And here is my opportunity to search just certain sources. So here, for example, I could go to select items, hit select, and select maybe just my interview transcripts. So here I'm going to select just interviews, and I'm looking at all the words that come up in my interviews. I'm going to leave this the same, just created or modified by any user. But NVivo does track all the users in any database, and you can limit any of these queries to a specific user if you wanted. Here, the default is 1,000, the 1,000 most frequent words. I can limit that to just 50, for example. So I'm going to do that. And I also have an option to limit the character length of the word. So maybe I want just words that are at least 3 characters in length. And then I'm going to click Run. And here are the results of my query. So what you see is a few different tabs. It opens with a few different tabs along this right-hand side. Here I'm going to go through each tab in turn and tell you what's in there. This first tab is the Summary tab. It gives you a list of all the words that are coming up in order of frequency. So the word, the length of the word, how many times it's come up, and this weighted percent is actually by character count what % of that data set that we searched is that word. Now this list is interactive, so say I wanted to look at every instance of the word people, I could double click on this and it will take me here to the word people in context. And as I scroll through, you'll see that there are these blue hyperlinks. What these are links directly back to the source document. So I can click on that blue hyperlink, and that took me to Barbara's interview transcript. And throughout Barbara's interview transcript, you'll see that the word people is highlighted in yellow. Also, if I wanted, I could expand what I'm looking at. So if I wanted a little more context, I could select and ask for a broader context. Say I wanted to read more around the words. It will give me that word people with more context around it. In addition to the summary tab, there's also the tag cloud. And I'm sure people have seen these a lot on the web. What it's showing you is the larger words are the more frequent words, and the smaller words are less frequent. And again, this is interactive, so if I want to see every mention of the word water, I can double click there on water, and it takes me down to the data. Another visualization that comes with this query is called the tree map. And this again is showing you in order of frequency. So from the top left, the most frequent word, all the way to the bottom right, the least frequent word. And also interactive, so also everything here is clickable. And lastly, the cluster analysis. This is showing you the words and also how they tend to cluster in this data that you're searching. So it's showing you which words tend to co-occur in the same document and happen closer together. So you'll see water, island, and land tend to happen closer together in this data. And this can be viewed in a few different ways. So it can be viewed as this is called a dendrogram. You can also view it on an axis and zoom in and out of it if you want to look at those relationships. And here it's showing you not just the relationships, but also the larger the balls, the greater the frequency. The other thing I wanted to mention is when these word frequency queries are run, there's actually what's called a stop word list that's assigned. There's a default list that's assigned to each project, meaning, so the stop words would be the words that NVivo is going to ignore when it runs these queries. So they're words like I and the and I want to show you where that's located, and you can actually change that list and customize it to your own project. So under File, let me go back there again. Under File, Info, and Project Properties, every project has this stop words list. And you'll see these are the words that are by default included in that list. So you can add to this list, but you can also take these out. So depending on what type of analysis you're interested in doing, you may want some of these words in. And that is customizable. So Anu, do you want to take some questions now? Are there any questions, or should I keep going?
Good, hold on. I think it might be a good time to stop and ask if this is the kind of analysis that folks are looking to do. Sheila, you had a question. Do you have a microphone? Would you like me to go ahead? Let me give you, I'm going to turn your microphone on if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question, or you can type in the chat window if that's simpler. So while the questions are coming in, you have our first question, Shimrit, about can you just print under the file just like you do in Microsoft? Can you print the word cloud out after you create it?
Yeah, so I'll show you how you export that. So to export the tag cloud, you can right-click in the white space here and say Export Tag Cloud. And that gets exported as a, there are a few different options. So it looks like a Word document or a PDF. And actually the newest version of NVivo 10 has a lot of very fancy formatting that you can do with this, where you can, it has all different colors and the text can be in different directions. So it's kind of fun to play with.
Yeah, and I think you can also export the words out of here if you wanted to use something like Wordle to make them look extra fancy. I guess, Shimrit, can you talk a little bit about the organizational structure you showed us in terms of having the interviews and the other aspects of your research project? And also with the stop words, what kind of stop words have you seen that people have benefited from adding to their stop word list?
Sure. So in terms of the organizational structure, this coding structure here that they have in this in the sample database is actually pretty common. So it can be hierarchical, and these are called nodes. So each one of these blue circles is called a node, and I like to compare it to like a bucket of information. So everything related to a certain topic that you've defined can go into this bucket of information so that you can pull it out later at any point if you wanted to look at it. And in NVivo, you'll see that in this list view, it gives you a few kind of quick stats about each one of these buckets. So for example, here, for the node community, you'll see that it tells you how many sources or source documents are coded there at community, and then how many references. And references would be chunks of text, essentially, that somebody read through and selected and put into this bucket. And this is interactive, so I can double click on community here and it brings up everything that somebody coded at community. And when I talk about chunks of text, I'm talking about each of these sections or passages in between these two, the gray areas that say reference 1, reference 2, and reference 3.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Does anyone have any questions about the word frequency query? I know we have two other types of queries that Shimrit was planning to demonstrate.
And I also wanted to quickly point out that sometimes when people will run these, you can actually, if you run this and you see like, oh, I see that water is coming up a lot and I think I'd like to explore that further, you can actually then create water into a node that then becomes a part of your coding structure. And you could do that simply by selecting water and right-clicking and say create as node. And then all of the content that came up underwater would be created as a node, and you can put that straight into your coding structure and go from there.
Oh, that's wonderful. Carolyn, did you want to ask a question? Would you like to use your microphone? Or would you like to chat with us? Carolyn, you're welcome to just talk. I think you should have microphone privileges.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, no, we can't hear you that well. Maybe we're better off using the chat. We heard you very faintly.
Okay, I can type or shout. I'll type.
Okay.
While Carolyn is typing, I also wanted to quickly demonstrate a different way to run this query. So I'm going to go up here to queries and just quickly change a parameter that I used earlier to run this query. And instead of looking for exact matches, I'm going to look at synonyms and then rerun it just so you see what happens. NVivo actually has a built-in thesaurus that it uses to do these types of searches. And so when I run this with synonyms, what happens is it gives me, it groups words together that it considers synonyms. So what you get rather than an exact list of words is you get sort of more of a list of themes or ideas that are coming up. But just a word of caution, if you look at some of these synonyms, they might not be words that you consider synonyms of a word, and so this should be used lightly.
I see that. I see that I might want to code it very differently than what NVivo is doing. I guess why don't you go ahead, Shimrit, and show us our second query, and we'll come back to the chat for Carolyn's question. I'm going to go ahead and make your screen full screen. Oh, actually, our question has come in from Carolyn. Can you combine more than one word, for example, water and pollution, to put all related text into one node?
So that's what I'm going to show you next. I'm going to show you a text search query. Okay.
Oh, Robert, did you want to go ahead and tell us your question? I'll turn your microphone on. Oh. Oh, he wants to know if he can create his own list of synonyms.
So there is no way to do that right now.
Great.
Okay.
So we're going into the text search query now. I'm going to make your screen full screen, Shimrit.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to go ahead and search for the word water, since Carolyn already suggested that. And you'll see in a text search query, you get this big text box where you can type whatever word or phrase you want to search for. So you can search for a word or a list of words. And you can use these Boolean search terms, including wildcards and even a fuzzy search. And what that gives you is if you have a word you're not sure exactly what the word might look like, you could put in what you think it looks like, and if you click fuzzy, it will give you things that look similar to it. So for now, I'm going to leave it at water. And again, I just want to point out that this query can be saved. So you can, again, save the question for later if you want to rerun it. I'm going to leave it at exact matches for now and search just text sources. And then also select some items from the list here. So I'm going to select my interviews. And I know that these are interviews because the icon here is this yellow notepad. These other items are the little film strip is a video and the little thought bubble is an audio file. And then I'll also include some of my social media sources as well in this search. And I'm going to click Run. So with a text search query, again, I get several tabs along the right-hand side here. The Summary tab tells me all the different sources where that word has shown up. And down here in the bottom left, I can see a count of that, a count of the number of sources and the total number of references. So you see the word water has come up in 12 sources and it has 98 references. And each of these items tells me how many references are in each, and then by character count and what percent of the document was the word water. And this is also a hyperlink, so I could go directly to the source document. This next tab, the Reference tab, gives me the word water in context. And again, throughout I have hyperlinks that take me back to the source document. So if I click on those, I can look at the source document with the word highlighted. Then each of these subsequent tabs, the text tab shows me all the text sources where the word water came in. And then the data set tab. So data sets in NVivo can either be survey, sources from survey data where you may be asked Likert scales and throughout some open-ended responses, and you could bring that in tabular format and code it that way. In addition, now with these web sources that you can bring into NVivo, like Facebook content and Twitter content and LinkedIn, all those types of things can also be brought in as a data set and can also have in them information about I'll double click on this to show you information about the person who posted the tweet. So you'll see this is a Twitter source, and here's the word water highlighted. But if I go through here, it shows me the time of the tweet, the hashtags, how many followers the person has. So this is how Twitter content can be brought into NVivo as well. And then this last tab is called the word tree. So this is the visualization that comes in when you run a text search query. And what this is showing you is that this around the word water, these are the words and phrases that tend to come before and after. And this is kind of a monstrous result here because there are just so many instances of the word water. But if I zoom out, I just want to show you that what it's doing is if you click on one side, sort of on one side of the equation, it's showing you the path that those words tend to take before and after the word water.
So Shimrit, can you help us think through the major differences between the text query and the word search query?
Sure. So the word frequency query is kind of just doing a global scan of all of your data and telling you the words that are being used in your data. And that can give you an idea of the kinds of patterns or trends or things that people are talking about. And as I demonstrated, those can be specific words or they can be sort of broader themes or ideas that are coming up using that synonyms feature. A text search query is very different. You would want to know the words that you are looking for and possibly their synonyms, though you can also use the synonyms tool here as well, and I can show you that. But the idea is that you would use this maybe as a broad stroke. You might think that people are talking about a certain thing, but you wanna test that and see where it's showing up in your data, so you could do a quick search to see. Also, if you're looking for a specific document where you know a certain word or phrase was used, you could use this to sort of locate that.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. So in a sense, the first one is a rote examination of your data, and this one you're starting with a mental model and figuring out if that was validated.
Yep.
Great. It's 10:30. I think we overestimated how much material we could cover in a half an hour. Why don't we see if there's any questions on the text query? If you have time to stay with us, Shimrit was going to show us a matrix query next. If you don't have time, since we advertised this as a half an hour workshop, we will not take it the wrong way. If you need to leave, we will be recording the entire session. Why don't I take a minute to ask if anyone has any questions about the text search query before we start on the matrix query. Okay, I think we are ready for the third demo whenever you would like, Shimrit.
Sure. So the matrix query is pretty complicated to run. So first I want to just show you a query that's already in the sample database. And again, everybody will have access to the sample database. So if you're looking at NVivo, even in the library, you can open the sample database. So I'm going to run an existing query that's already in the database and just tell you what comes with it. And then if we feel like we have enough time, I can show you how you would create one from scratch. Does that sound good, Anu?
That sounds great. I think this data set is pretty phenomenal in terms of showing best practices on how to use NVivo.
Absolutely, and I always encourage people to use this data set as a as a point of reference for how to organize your data, how to format it potentially, what kinds of tools you can use, and how to use them. So here I've run a matrix query, and this matrix query is looking at reasons people have cited as reasons for fishing decline in this region that they're studying. And just to point out, those reasons were collected by reading through all of the data and coding it. So there was no magical step here. There was a lot of work put into reading through all of the text and then coding it into these 7 categories. So you'll see some people thought it was due to the cost of doing business, due to regulations. Now this matrix query is showing you that those reasons by whether the respondent was a commercial fisherman or a recreational fisherman. And these numbers in these cells, by default, when you run a matrix query, are going to be references. So the number or the number of chunks of text that were coded to that item. And this is all interactive again. So I can go into this cell, for example, where recreational fishermen cited as it's due to the cost of doing business. And when I go in here, I'll see these pieces of the documents that were coded as due to the cost of doing business. And I know that they were stated by recreational fishermen. And you'll see here again is that 4 reference count. So 1 reference, 2 reference, 3, and 4. That's where it came from. And again, I have hyperlinks directly to the source documents. I can change.
It sounds almost like the matrix query is taking qualitative data, but giving you more quantitative ways to slice and dice it.
Yeah, and I always like to warn people a little bit about that, only because sometimes it can be dangerous to quantify your qualitative data, and that's why it's so useful to be able to double click in any of these cells and go and look at your data to see what people are saying rather than just looking at counts. So that's just something to keep in mind. I also wanted to show you that you can change this default setting of showing you the number of references to the number of people. Like say you wanted to count, well, how many people said X? You can do that by right-clicking and going to cell content, looking at nodes, and then going to person here. And here you see the numbers changed, and it went from 4 to 3 and from 8 to 6. So now it's actually counting the number of people that made those statements.
Right, so one person doesn't throw off your numbers if they go on and on about a particular topic.
Exactly.
Great. Why don't we see if the RR group has any questions for us? Would you like Shimrit to go into any greater detail on any of the material she has covered this morning? So you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat window. I think we have pretty much gone through the 3 queries you had planned. I think, Shimrit, you had been planning to show us how to set up a matrix query, but why don't we see if that is something that everyone would like to watch, or if you have general questions about NVivo, this might be a nice time to open up the floor.
Sure. And I just also wanted to say that in order to run this matrix query, there was a lot of setup work that went into it. There was obviously all the coding that I mentioned, but also there was importing of all of these other kinds of demographic or attribute data about the people. For example, like the fact that they're commercial versus recreational fishermen. And there's a lot of back-end work that goes into doing that.
Shimrit, do you have any suggestions for people half the group had not used NVivo yet? Do you have suggestions in terms of getting started with this sample data set?
Yeah, so there are
we have a question.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
Did you want me to?
Oh, sorry. We have a question from Lee Berry about can you see the nodes that have been assigned to passages within the source?
So I think, does the person mean within this data? There is a way to also cross-reference. So when I open any of these, whether it's, for example, this cell from the matrix, I can turn on what are called coding stripes. So if I have this open, I go to the View tab, and coding stripes can be turned. You can turn on recently coded, most coding, least coding. I can just turn on recently coding, for example, just to demonstrate. And now you get a cross-reference of what you're looking at. So here we're looking at due to the cost of doing business, but you can also see that this is coded. This section of text, for example, if you go over here to the side, is also coded at economy, and fishing in industry decline. So it's a way to cross-reference what you're looking at with other themes and ideas that have been tagged there. In any of these transcripts, I can do the same thing. So if I open Barbara's transcript, I can turn on the stripes. Again, I'll just turn on recently coding, but I can select any codes that I want. And again, I'm looking at this passage, for example, and I can see that it's coded at natural environment, water quality, and real estate development.
So it sounds like this is the part that takes a lot of manual time, is going through the transcripts and doing the coding.
Definitely, definitely.
Great. Would you like to say any concluding remarks, Shimrit? I'm wondering, I would be very interested in hearing from our audience if this was a helpful way to learn NVivo, and if so, we could talk about other mini topics that might be covered in about a half an hour, closer to 40 minutes. And I think the date of your workshop, Shimrit, is at the end of January, right? Is your next NVivo Basics?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact date. It might have been the 31st, but I'm not sure.
I can look it up and email the group.
Okay.
That would be pretty easy. So you're getting several compliments in the chat window.
Okay.
Oh, it's the NVivo workshop is January 30th at 10 o'clock. So if you would like to meet with Shimrit in person, come over to the Weigel Information Commons, and you can spend an hour and a half on NVivo and get comfortable with the basic aspects. Do you have any concluding words, Shimrit, before we wind up our webinar?
Yeah, just thanks everybody for joining us. And NVivo is a big program, so this is like really just a glimpse at a little bit of the interface and what's possible. But you had asked me about tutorials and things online. So the company that makes NVivo has some pretty nice tutorials where they use this sample database. And if you just Google NVivo tutorials, it'll probably take you to YouTube. And those can be helpful just as an introduction.
Yeah, I think one of the things we might want to think about maybe in a few months is pulling together a user group, because we're hearing here at the Weigel Information Commons, we're hearing from so many people around campus with interest in NVivo that I think simply getting everyone together might be really an interesting conversation. The types of data folks are working with are so different from each other. So thanks everybody for taking time to come join us on Adobe Connect. We'll send you a survey link afterwards to give us some feedback and also to let us know topics that might be of interest for you for future webinars. Shimrit, thank you so much for taking time. I know the technology had lots of ups and downs this morning, so thank you for being very, very patient with that.
My pleasure.